Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. This week, I'm joined by Lian Brook Tyler of Primal Happiness. Lian is someone that I met a few years ago. She was someone who was on a similar journey to myself, and I've really seen her grow both in herself and in her business. I'm really excited to have her on the show. We're going to cover some really quite personal things today that Lian's gone through, and I hope it's going to bring a lot of hope to people listening to this episode. Welcome, Lian.
Hey, Kush. Great to be here. Really, really honoured to be invited on, actually.
Good. I know we've spoken about this. I can't believe it's taken us so long to have you on the show, but I'm really glad that you're with us today. Like with many of the people that I have on the show, I think a good place to start is for people who don't know you, they've not heard of yourself or Primal Happiness. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Without going into the story that I think we'll start to unpack a bit in a moment, I tried to give you the highlights without all the detail. But I run a platform, education platform, with my business partner, Jonathan Wilkinson. And what we're all about is pointing people back to that happiness that's inside them. And that's been described in all sorts of ways in three principles terms, which I know the guests that you generally have on this show are talking about a three principles perspective, which we do too. They might describe that as innate well-being. We've, over time, found that we're talking about it more and more as this kind of very natural state, our primal state. So the word primal, we're using it in that way that it's something that's inherent to us, innate to us, natural to us. And more and more, I've seen that that's so true, not just for myself, but also for other people. And so we're pointing back to that state, but what we're also starting to do, and that's why we've launched Primal Happiness. People might know me from before, from our previous venture, Born Happy, and we've literally just launched Primal Happiness because we really wanted to show people the other parts of life and the other parts of humans that when they're in place, they also really help us thrive, again, very, very naturally. And they could be the way that we move, the way we get out in nature, the way we eat. When we have those things in place, they make it so much easier for humans to get in touch with that part of themselves that is totally designed to thrive.
Yeah, and I highly recommend people listening to this do head over. I'll put all the links in the notes. And do check out what Lian's up to and Jonathan, both of them great people and doing some great things in the world. I guess really to start off this show, I know that you went through a fairly what most people would say quite a tragic experience when you were younger, and then have kind of come through that to this really happy, connected person with great relationships in your life. I was wondering, and I know you've not really talked about this before, so really honoured that you would be willing to talk to us about it, but I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what happened to you many years ago and what changed, what's enabled you to kind of move forward and live such a great life now.
Sure, I'd be really happy to, and feel free, I'll sort of pause in places rather than me just do a monologue. Feel free to jump in with a question and I'll kind of pause now and again so you can do that. So kind of winding back before that, and I think this is important because some of this I've only joined the dots on as life's gone on. You don't necessarily look huge amounts at the way you've been parented until you're an adult and you've got some perspective and you maybe got children yourself and you see how you parent your children. And I think it's important to say that before the event that I'm going to talk about happened, I had an amazing upbringing. It wasn't like this, fairy tale, everything perfect, but I had a father, I was brought up by a single father. And he was amazing. I felt loved to bits, supported to bits. He was he constantly pointed in me that I had this resourcefulness, I had this resilience, and he really constantly gave me opportunities to find that in myself and to explore life, be curious. And I think that's important to mention, because I think it for me, that journey was rediscovering that, that he actually saw very clearly straight away. So that's where I'd come from. I was generally this very happy, confident, connected, open human being. And then really just out of the blue, this event, for want of a better way of describing it, happened. And it was, without going into huge amounts of details, because there's some of this which is personal to other people and could even have kind of legal ramifications. So I don't want to go into huge amounts of details in terms of what actually happened. But in a nutshell, I found myself in a situation where I was beaten up very badly and sexually assaulted. And it was by a group of men. And the event itself was obviously, very challenging to go through. At the time as well, I thought my boyfriend at the time was involved in that event, and I thought he was going to die. So it was, I'm not going to say it's the worst thing that's ever happened to a human being, but, as you can imagine at the time, it was a very, very difficult situation. And in terms of my injuries at the time, I did have injuries. My nose was broken. I had some very deep cuts. But I thought I'd kind of come out of it okay. And I actually thought mentally I'd come out of it okay initially. And I'd always had this, and again, probably due to my father, I'd always had this very kind of, the language I'd probably use now is like a creator kind of mindset. I really just wouldn't accept being a victim. I couldn't accept that role of victim. I couldn't accept the fact that someone had done something to me and had taken my power. So initially, after that had happened, I was feeling like I was doing okay. And then this is, again, quite interesting looking back on it. I don't think I actually probably have much until this conversation, Looking at it, it's funny how society almost wants you to play that role. It's safer and more normal and more accepted for you to be that victim. And so a number of events happened. For example, I had to go to a police doctor to have photos taken. And that experience I found really difficult. I had to be examined by a police doctor. I found that experience very difficult. I was referred to counselling, which I actually ended up not doing, because the woman actually said to me, I don't think you need that. But the very experience, like, you should have counselling, you're going to need counselling, that kind of, again, was pointing out there is something wrong with you, there's something broken, there should be a problem here. And then I think the final straw, which did kind of point to me, there's something wrong, there's something broken here, is I had to go through a series of identity parades to identify the men who had done it. And I think there was maybe 4 or 5 of these, but they were quite odd. They were like different types. So some of them were, like you see in films where, you have a row of people and you have to point them out. I think there were a couple of those. And then there was a couple of really weird ones where you had to stand in a public place and the person would be asked to walk past. They wouldn't know exactly where you're standing. The night before the first one of those, I had the first panic attack of my life, and it was huge. I was in the bath at the time, and I didn't know it was a panic attack. I just had the mother of all panic attacks, and my limbs were going everywhere. I thought I was going to drown. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know if it was a fit or what was going on. It turned out to be a panic attack, and that was the start of me having panic attacks fairly regularly. Whenever I found myself in that kind of position of stress, under attack, not feeling safe. And then about probably a few weeks after that, I noticed that initially it was my tooth. If I was out in cold weather, I would notice my tooth felt a bit funny. You just sometimes get that sensitive feeling when you've been out in the cold, but it seemed to be hanging around. And that developed until it went from it being just my tooth feeling a bit sensitive to feeling like it was a toothache. And then that feeling actually spread to the entire side of that jaw. And that went on for 15 years. So over 15 years, I was dealing with the panic attacks and anxiety emotionally. And then I was dealing with this constant, now chronic pain of my face. And tried, most things you can think of seriously. It's funny because I'm a very much like in the moment person. And it's sometimes only when I have a conversation like this, I reflect on, wow, I tried so many things. I mean, from a medical perspective, I was offered all sorts of things, like even anti-epilepsy drugs, because they were desperate to figure out what was wrong, couldn't really identify. It's sort of one of those things it got called in the end atypical facial pain. But it's just one of those names they give something when they just, what the hell is this? And had NLP, all sorts of herbal medicines, hypnosis, just tons and tons and tons of things, and nothing touched it. Not even, and sometimes I'm pleased about this, but not even normal painkillers would touch it, which I'm glad, because I probably would have then found like I was taking a lot of painkillers, but because they didn't work, there's no point doing that. And so, 15 years. And the funny thing is, a lot of people that knew me then had no clue about any of this. They didn't know the attack had happened. They didn't know about the panic attacks, and they didn't know about the facial pain. It was just something that, again, I think that there was a bit of me that still had that probably a lot of me that still had that real creator mindset. I'm not going to be a victim. I'm not going to be this person that is giving into this struggle. And so I still came across very, very much a happy person. Even the days where I was suffering from really chronic pain, I just wouldn't mention it to people. They just wouldn't know. And then fast forwarding to, so this has now been going on 15 years. So 3 years ago from today. And
before we move on, Lian, I just want to ask a really quick question. In hindsight now, do you think that was a good thing? I'm just thinking about people might be listening to this who may have been going through a difficult time. Are you saying it was a good thing that you didn't mention it, or would you advise people to talk about it if they want to? Would you do anything different?
I don't know if I can advise people on this really, because for me, that was my journey. And for the reasons I've said, the way we show up as people is formed from all those things that have happened to us that have formed that way of thinking. So although it's thought in the moment, my thoughts in the moment were very much formed by the childhood I'd had, the upbringing I'd had, what I'd seen around me. And so I don't know, honestly. I wouldn't say that was a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. It was just what I did, what made sense to me. I think it maybe put me in a position possibly where what I'm about to describe to you, I was more open to, because I hadn't become fixed into this way of thinking about myself and talking about myself. So possibly there was that allowed that openness to be there still. But equally, I do wonder whether I built another box around myself of, I'm so strong, I'm never weak, I'm never a victim, I'm always this positive, confident, happy, friendly person. And so how can I show weakness? And so I think there was a lack of, these days we talk about this as vulnerability, but I actually prefer the word openness, just a willingness to show up as we are. And I do think I was probably holding back from that perspective. So I think we can feel that, can't we, in the moment? It's very hard for me to go back now and know exactly what my thinking was in that moment. But now I know when I'm holding back from something, and I can sort of sense the thinking that's behind that. And so I'd probably these days be more likely to say, oh, this is how I am today. Maybe I'm struggling with this a bit more. Whereas before I probably wouldn't have done, but maybe not for actually healthy reasons.
No, thanks. That makes a lot of sense.
So going back 3 years ago, I lost my father very suddenly. He died in a car accident. And as I've, alluded to, we were very, very close, single parent family. I absolutely adored him. And it was really, even now, 3 years on, I get emotional talking about it, because it was, I think, that one thing I thought, I will never be able to cope. That one day, obviously, we lose our parents. I've kind of, I know I have to, as a human being, accept these facts of life. But there was one thing I just thought, I don't know if I ever could. I think it might be the one thing that would just break me. And I think it actually, in a funny way, did break me, but it broke me open. And it was so strange because this thing had happened, which, I'd always would have thought this would be just awful. There's no way I could cope with losing him, and especially the way we lost him. It was almost farcical in how difficult it was. We had so many issues. There was a police investigation into. I mean, it was just almost like how bad that thing 15 years ago had been. It was like that almost all over again. There was a police investigation. The ambulance made mistakes, so there was a investigation into what happened there. It was very, very difficult. And that was going on the outside, but it was really weird because even that very first day he died, I felt something change inside me, but for the better. And so without going into a lot of detail, that year after he died, I really started noticing that I was just waking up a lot more to just the beauty of life, the amazingness of it, the stuff that really, really matters. And then it was a year to the day, almost, after, I think it was kind of like he died the September the 3rd, and it was like September the 2nd. It was like crazily close. And because of this change that I'd had in myself over the last year, I felt like I was searching for something. I felt so good myself, so different. I thought, wow, if I can come through this and feel like this, I need a way of sharing this to others. I'm sharing this with others. I need a way of helping other people. So I've been like Googling away different things, NLP, and, maybe I could train in this, maybe I could do this. And I'd heard a couple of mentions of this thing called the 3 principles, which I'd never heard of before. And I've told this story before, but I think it's relevant because it is such an important part of then what happened over the next couple of years that I think it's worth giving it in the context here. Just one day in the kitchen, and this always makes me laugh because it's like such an undramatic, unspiritual story. But I just Googled, I just thought, I'll get around to Googling that thing now. What was it? 3 principles. Yeah. So Google 3 principles. And even back then, if you Googled it, what came up wasn't generally that good. 3 Principles movies, which was and is awesome. But other than that, most of the websites there that weren't that, there weren't these sort of big glossy, this is what it is. And I just think I came across a blog post and it just said a paragraph in like a sentence each, what mind, thought and consciousness were. And I read mind and I was like, wow, yeah, that's what I've been seeing over the last year. That stuff, that completely makes sense. We talked about the intelligence behind everything and the way everything's connected, and there's just, the miracle of it all. It was just, yes, that's it. And then I read consciousness and I remember kind of thinking like, whatever, it just seemed a bit like what it, that's what it is, like it just, there was no real connection there. And then I read the sentence about thought, and I don't know what it said. I don't know if it said, it probably said something, it's the creative power, it creates your experience. And I don't know if it said something like we feel what we think, but it said something along those lines, a very simple sentence. And it was like a bomb went off in my head. It was crazy. I read this sentence and it was just amazing. Like I had visuals and everything where all of these things that I thought were true, all of these things that I thought were facts, all of these things that I thought were my personality, my past, how I am, what I like, what I dislike, what I'm scared of, just was like a kind of, I don't know, like a procession going across my mind's eye, I suppose. All these things kind of almost like dancing along, like, hey, you remember me? That thing you're scared of? That's just thought. And then something else, that thing that happened to you 15 years ago? That's just thought. And I was just mind blown. Oh my, and it wasn't like an intellectual, is this thought? It was just in that moment, it was so obvious to me. It's all thought. Oh my goodness. That means all of it. It's just, how can I take any of this seriously? That's all it's all made of. Wow, we can do anything. That means we can think anything can be true or not true. And so that, as you can probably hear, just, if I thought I changed a lot over the last year, that changed me in an instant, in an actual instant. It was crazy. And so much so, it was About a week or so later, and I was, I'd changed massively on a mental level. It was like all the stuff that I thought was a big deal was no longer a big deal. I was just bursting with, happiness, life, energy. Oh my goodness, the world needs to know this. And then I was driving my children to school, and I was suddenly had that feeling, and you think like, what have I forgotten? And looked around the car. I was like, no, I've got my children, got their lunch boxes, got my handbag. What's missing? Oh my goodness, it's the pain. The tooth pain after 15 years had gone.
Just overnight.
Well, I don't even know when it happened. I mean, it must have happened. I don't know if it happened gradually over that week or if it had happened when I woke up that morning. I don't even know, because I noticed its absence rather than it going, or it was just crazy. And that's now 2 and a bit years ago. And I've had a couple of days since where if I've got a lot of painful thinking, and when I say painful thinking, you could describe that as stressful thinking or anxiety thinking. I've literally had probably 2 days in the last 2 years where it's come back a tiny bit. Like, whereas before I would have been like most days a 10 out of 10 in terms of pain, I've had like a couple of days where I've maybe had like a 3 out of 10. So you can pretty much say it's gone, but, never say never. And so I just wanted to give that as an example, because although that's not, I feel like I've probably taken a ton of time talking about things that have got nothing to do with relationships, but I sort of feel like I have to do justice to that, because otherwise I think it can sound, without giving that background, a bit like, well, how on earth did you get from there to there, if that makes sense? So that's kind of the story. I'm going to now hand back to you, Kush, and, just ask me anything.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Lian. And it's quite an incredible story. And I'm thinking if someone's listening to this, and they've got their version of it, whatever that looks like, whether it's something from their past, whether it's some kind of pain, they might be thinking that just sounds too simple. What you said is that's just simple. They might even be thinking, oh, I'm just going to dismiss this because that was just Lian, and she's one of these random people that, we hear about, that they cure themselves of cancer, or they, something miraculously changes. What would you say to those people? Is this just a one-off?
I think we're all one-off, so I don't think there is a way that we can say any one person's journey is everyone's journey, or anything that happens to someone is going to happen the same way to someone else. And I think, and nor should it. The design is that we all on this kind of unique path. And I don't mean that in a woo-woo way, just factually we are. We're all going to have different stuff. We've had different experiences, different thinking. And so, no, quite frankly, what happened to me may not happen to any other human being, but we all have the opportunity to have our own version of that. And it might not be this kind of big, mind-blowing, one-off event, but whatever it is will have its own perfection, and it will be perfect for you. If whoever's listening, you have that capacity for change. You have that capacity to be open to change, just the same as I did. And I do sometimes think that, again, our journeys are so perfect for us. As it turned out, in that moment, I was really, if I could have articulated what is it that I want, going back 2 years ago when that happened, I wanted to find a way to help other people. And I was already on that journey. My journey for right now is helping and teaching and pointing other people towards this. So in order to have that, I guess, bizarrely, I was meant for that to happen. And I don't mean meant to in a predestined way, but it kind of makes it the conditions were in place. And then it's given me this foundation to then move forward with, to do exactly what I wanted. My deepest desire was to be able to help other people. And wow, there was it. That's not necessarily going to be someone else's deepest desire. But if we have the openness to something, it's likely to show up.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to cover this on, like you say, this is a relationship series, but one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this was, number one, it was such a powerful story, and number two, what takeaway I took from it was just how powerful and hopeful it is. That even though you went through a situation which, by most people's estimations, I would assume, is a pretty tragic thing to have happened. And despite that happening, and actually even before we even talked about the principles behind state of mind, and this experience you had 2.5 years ago, I'm by that stage, I'm assuming you were married, you had kids, and from what I know of you, it seemed to be, you were getting on with life. And I find that incredibly hopeful. And on top of that, once you start learning a bit more about the principles behind a state of mind, once you saw the truth of them, just how much deeper your experience of life became. And I've only met you after that point, so I don't know what you were like before. But really, you live with such a joyful life. And could you talk a little bit about what your relationship was like with your kids and your husband beforehand and afterwards? Because I think that would be quite interesting and quite relevant to this show.
Sure. And I must say, actually, probably the biggest areas of change have actually been outside of my relationship with my immediate family. And I will talk a bit about that as well, because there's been changes I've seen in my wider circle, which I just never believed were possible. And that gives me such hope that that's possible for other people. But I'll get to that. So again, I was generally, an upbeat, happy, outgoing person. But I did definitely had this huge need for control. And again, I think it was all that part of that, me doing my best to be resilient, to survive, not be a victim. For me, the way that showed up was, if I can control it all, if I can kind of have life designed as I need it to be, it will be safe, it will be contained, I will be okay. And so obviously life does its own thing. It doesn't go according to my plan or anyone else's. And so just simple things would cause so much stressful thinking. And, any parents listening to this will know that, oh my goodness, getting ready for school, there's never the shoes that need to be there. And it's like, we do this every day. Why are your shoes not where they should be? Oh my goodness, find your shoes. Now actually put your shoes on. No, I don't want you to do that. I want you to put your shoes on. And all parents will know this whole ridiculousness that goes with trying to get your children ready and out the door for school. And seriously, I'm not kidding when I say back then I'm sure most days of the week we'd walk up the garden path with one or more of us crying, where it just got so stressy, so everyone just annoyed with everyone else. It would just kind of would finally get out the door and we'd be like weeping with either relief or frustration or anger. It was that bad. And it's not like, it wasn't like I was, what you describe as a horrible parent. Back then I had a lovely relationship with my children. They're lovely, happy children. Then I did too. But I think, to be honest, that sadly is what we call normal. Most of my friends would describe a very similar situation takes place every single school day in their household. And so that example I've given would show up in all these other areas of life as well. My husband, funny enough, the example, for some reason, I used to constantly give, going back a couple of years ago when I first used to give interviews about this, for some reason about my husband was always the bin. Like, our relationship seemed to centre around whether the bin had been emptied or not and who had done it. Which now it's really funny remembering that, because I haven't thought about the bin in like 2 years. See, these things can really change. So back then, I just had this whole relationship about, the bin. And oh my goodness, how could he have not emptied it? He's just gone out for work and just left it overflowing. That means I've either got put up with it all day. Why would you even put up with an overflowing bin all day? Because it's the principle. And, crazy amounts of thinking about the bin and therefore my marriage. Which sound ridiculous. But again, I think even if most people that are in a relationship don't have the bin thought, they'll have their equivalent. To them, it might not be as ridiculous, but I'll probably think theirs is ridiculous. We all have this stuff that for us is our way of showing up and keeping control. So, and as I've just said, the bin thought just isn't in my thinking anymore. And it was really funny. It was like the first couple of days after I had this realization about thought, I remember the bin thought came up and then it was just like, oh, wow, yeah, cool. That's how it works. I have a thought about how annoying he's not emptied the bin. and I feel stressed. Oh, but if I'm not thinking about how annoying it is, it doesn't empty the bin, I'm cool. Wow, it really does work like that. And that sounds really basic and really simple, but for me, that was huge. It just showed over and over again, it is how it works, it is how it works. And so, how can that not transform your relationships? When every time you feel like crap, you're thinking, oh, it's my thinking that's making me feel like crap, it's not them. So it makes no sense to have a go at them for what I'm thinking. Why would it?
Yeah, and it's funny how you talk about it and you laugh because, like you said, I'm sure everyone's got their version of that. And even with bins, I'm thinking about it. And I remember when I was at university and my flatmates would never empty the bin, and it used to wind me up something rotten. And it would literally get to a stage where there was 3 bin bags full of stuff around the bin.
Ridiculous things that we'd never want.
Right? To like, I'm not taking it out because it's their turn. Yeah, and then eventually I take it out, muttering and moaning and getting upset. And then actually, but on the flip side, I remember when I was living in London, I don't know why, but I would never empty the bin. And in a way, it was just like, oh, my flatmate, she did it. Now, she might have had exactly the same feelings.
She's having the big thought about you.
Yeah, why isn't he emptying it? But it's funny because we make these really, and when we talk about it, it's really obvious. We make these really small things really, really big deals. And they can affect and overshadow what actually is a great relationship or a great friendship or, any kind of relationship.
Yeah, so can. And it sounds so simple. You could easily listen to this and think, well, really, I have actually got much bigger problems in my relationship than him not emptying the bin. I get that. But I would say, if you're listening to this and this is something that's new to you or you're listening to skeptically, I say great. I always look at things with that question mark and I want to see this. Is this true? I want to see this for myself. So firstly, I applaud you. If you're thinking that, fantastic. That is a great start. But then just go and look at how that works for yourself. You might not be having the bin thought. You might be having he's looking at other women thought, or the he doesn't support me thought, or I don't know, she doesn't love me thought. Whatever that thought is, it'll be having the same impact. Just like for me, that example I've given you, and I could give you lots of others. It's just, hey, that's the one I've given you because honestly, that was the one that I really noticed at the time, and that did change everything for me. But if you notice when you're thinking about whatever it is that you're saying is that big problem, notice how that feeling shows up in you. But get curious about that for yourself. You definitely don't need to believe me when I'm saying to you, this is how it works. And it doesn't need to be as small as that bin thought. It can be any kind of thought and it works the same.
So would you say, so people might be saying, okay, great. So I recognize this. I recognize it's getting me stressed. Then what? What would you say to someone going, okay, so I recognize I have my stuff. I know I overreact, but what can I do about it?
I think that massively depends on, firstly, whether it actually needs anything done with it. And what I've noticed more and more is how little things actually do need doing. So the bin one, for example, now with no thinking about it, somehow it gets emptied. Either I do it or my husband does it. It didn't actually need, you could say we are doing something because we are emptying the bin. But in terms of that thought, in terms of the relationship to that thought, in terms of making my husband do stuff, I've done nothing. Actually, there was no action I needed to take. A lot of stuff in life actually happens very naturally when we get out of the way and just stop fixating, stop making a big deal out of it, stop having that attachment to that thought. So I think that's the first thing. Just be open to the fact that actually there may not be anything that we need to do. It may be cool just to recognise, oh, actually, all that was some thinking. There's nothing else going on here. Just by me recognising that I'm thinking, that might all that's needed here. And quite honestly, for me, I would say that's been true, I don't know, at least 99% of the time. Actually, when I now look at the things that I would have previously had a lot of stressful thinking around, it isn't like I suddenly worked out a different strategy to deal with it. I just stopped thinking about them and somehow they were cool. So I'm going to say that to start with. I'm going to go into something else in a moment, but does that make sense to you, Kush? Because I think that can sound very kind of a bit of a cliche almost, like, no, just chill. You don't need to do anything. But honestly, again, get curious about this for yourself. If you're listening and thinking like it's really not that simple, I do need to do something about it. There's some magic that gets created when we have that openness to sit back and actually look at something for what it is, without that lens of thinking we'd previously had.
Yeah, and I know that you also use the words woo-woo like I do. Like, this is not mystical or spiritual or magical. For me, I think what you're saying is it just gives you perspective. It's just taking a step back from that. Like you say, we all know in our hearts it's actually a small deal, but we make it into a big deal because we put meaning on it. But it's about taking a step back, having some perspective. And you and I can't tell anyone what to do because there are so many different situations. It's so unique. But actually just giving yourself that perspective is only going to be a good thing, in my opinion. And I think that's what you're pointing to.
Exactly. It's just, there is, again, you could say the word magic is a woo-woo. When I say there is a magic that happens, it's just like, it is so cool to notice situations change just purely by noticing the role my thinking's playing in it. And you could call that you get a different perspective. You could just say, simply, I've recognised the role of my own thinking in that situation. But that on its own changes stuff. It really does. And I couldn't put it more simply. It changes stuff, and not in a woo-woo, not law of attraction, not the universe playing out, but obviously it's going to change stuff. When you notice a key ingredient in something, that changes stuff. So, but then there are situations that we need to do stuff about. There definitely are. And again, kind of keeping the focus on relationships, I said just now that the biggest relationship changes I've noticed are actually not in my immediate family, but my wider family. And I had a couple of very difficult relationships in my wider family. Ones that, at certain points had got so difficult, there'd actually been, an estrangement for a period and some, very difficult times. I would have said those relationships probably could never change. And if they did change, they would be with, I don't know what I don't even know if I could have come up with an answer as to what you'd need to do. But you'd need to do some big stuff, There had to be some big intervention take place for those to change. And again, it's firstly recognising us just simply seeing the role of our own thinking in our relationships creates the space for change. And that's not, again, to say that does everything, but in one of these relationships I'm talking about, me recognising how my thinking was creating my feelings about that person, and then how my feelings were creating how I was acting towards that person. By doing so, when I started seeing them again after I had that recognition, I obviously was acting differently. That happens naturally. Our thinking changes, our feelings change, and we act differently. So I would say, again, it's not like we never need to do anything, but we also can kind of recognise our thinking changing automatically creates a different way of acting in us. So when it comes to relationship, the very fact that we are acting differently towards people is going to create a change. It's going to create a change in the relationship. And that, for me, blew me away. I didn't even expect that. I didn't design that. I didn't even think that was possible. But relationships that went from being very difficult are now just wonderful, like close, loving, supportive, just precious relationships. And, I'm feeling emotional talk about this now because I just would not have believed that would have been possible. I really wouldn't have done. So it's, I don't know if that was a very clear answer to your question, but, going back to your question was, so I recognise the role of my thinking. What do I do? Sometimes you don't need to do anything, but sometimes recognise that the doing will come from the change in thinking. And it always comes from that place. So I think even recognising whenever you do something, it's only ever going to come from your thinking in itself is a really useful part of this.
Yeah, and I was just saying to someone yesterday that we're not fixed entities. Even in terms of relationships, we're not fixed entities. There are times when we are probably great as partners and brothers or sisters or friends, and there are times when we're just not. But that doesn't mean that we're still us, and there's still that possibility, I feel, to have great relationships. And for me, the whole theme of this podcast with you really is hope. And for me, what I've seen based on what you've been talking about is just so much hope for things to change. And they might not. I don't know about you, Lian, but I've had some amazing things happen in my relationships, and there's some relationships which have been a bit more difficult and haven't changed. But overall, I've seen huge changes, and I'm far more hopeful over things when things don't work out than when they do, and typically they do tend to work out. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I just reflect on what you just said there about, things might not change, but I was thinking, well, everything does change, actually. I think it's our expectations around it that create a fixedness, if that makes sense. If our expectations are, all my relationships should be fabulous, and fabulous to me looks like X, then yeah, you can probably point at a few relationships and say they haven't changed. If you're open to the fact that it's all constantly changing, it's all constantly fluid, it is changing moment to moment. There is no way anything can remain fixed, because otherwise it'd be dead. I'm looking at some of the relationships that you could, in my life, that you could say, yeah, but they're not fabulous. But you know what? That's a huge change too, because I'm thinking differently. I'm cool with the fact that people are where they are. People are thinking as they're thinking. People are feeling as they're feeling. And that's still a relationship. That's still something I'm constantly learning and benefiting and seeing. And so the change is there. It doesn't necessarily need to look a certain way for me to say that's okay, or that's changed, or that's fabulous.
So the change is in you. I'm amazed that we've just got to the end of time almost. Is there anything that you wanted to... The end of time, that's it. This podcast and the universe will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we haven't covered so far?
Wow, yeah, it has flown by, hasn't it? I did feel like, yeah, we could go on for a while, yeah. And now you've asked me that question, I'm just like completely blank. Just coming back to what you just said there about hope, and I think it's a cool word and it's a cool feeling. And I think there's something I'm always conscious of, or aware of, probably a better way of describing it. So a lot of our work is around, we have a membership called Thrive. So our members have things like live Q&A calls and live coaching, and, we connect in various ways. And what I'm really conscious of is to not give people this sort of, this is how it is, believe me, and provide really a false hope. What I love is when people really do engage their own way of seeing this for themselves, and however that's going to show up for them in their life. And we had a lady who's been a member for the last year on our, we had a masterclass on relationships, funny enough, last night. And she shared something at the end, and she said she'd seen me almost like a mother to the group. And then she suddenly realized, oh, she, I don't need that. I don't need her to be my mother or my savior. She's more like a mirror. As so she was talking about me, I'm a mirror to her. And I love that. I just love the fact that hope is a two-edged sword. You know what it's like? It can be seen as almost a fixedness in itself, as in well, I hope that can change in this way for me. Or it can be, wow, if change is possible, if change is true, if change is always happening, I can be open to that too. And I don't know what that's going to look like in my life, but wow, the very fact that's possible is hopeful.
That's a beautiful place to end, Lian. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for being on the show today. if people wanted to find out more about you, what's the best way that they can do that?
So you can check us out at our newly launched website, which is, it's taken a couple of months to get there. We're really pleased. We launched it last week, and that's at primalhappiness.co. And yeah, you can have a look around there because we've got our weekly podcast, the Primal Happiness Show. You'll see that there. We've got all the details about our membership Thrive. So if you go along to primalhappiness.co, you will see it all.
Fantastic. I encourage everyone to strongly go and check out the site, check out what Lian's up to. I was interviewed for her show yesterday, so by the time this released a few weeks ago, but do check it out. She's doing some great work. Thanks once again, Lian, and I will connect with the listeners next time.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. I've really, really enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to the Relationship Series podcast. If you want to hear more, you can click the subscribe button below. You can share this and impact someone else who can benefit, or you can like it and encourage others to listen. Also, it'd be great if you leave me a comment below, as I always love hearing from listeners and I want to keep creating great content for you. Thanks for listening.